Welcome to See You on the Other Side, where the world of the mysterious collides with the world of entertainment. A discussion of art, music, movies, spirituality, the weird, and self-discovery. And now, your hosts, musicians and entertainers who have their own weakness for the weird. Mike and Wendy from the band Sunspot.
Urban legends, Wendy.
In a lot of cases, that's where it all begins, the weirdness.
It is. A lot of the weirdness comes from hearing some kind of story. And the fun thing about urban legends is that most of the time, you think it actually happened in your town.
Right.
You know, that you think it's specific to your area. And that's what always got me. Even when you'd hear something ridiculous, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that might have happened in our town. And, Allison was always trying to inflict different urban legends on me.
Ooh, to scare you?
I told you about this one time, didn't I? That I was like maybe 5 years old. We were coming home from a night, going out to eat, and I thought I saw somebody standing in the living room. And we'd come to my parents' house. It's all, there's a second floor, and it's all huge windows on the second floor where you can see inside the living room and the whole deal. And so I'm like, oh, is there somebody standing in the living room? And my mom's like, no, that's nothing. And Allison's like, oh, that's the farmer. I'm like, what farmer? And she goes, the farmer who used to live in our house before we lived in the house.
Oh, no.
He killed his family and then himself.
No.
And sometimes you can still see him. And she's like 12. She's like 12, and she's doing this until I'm crying, and I don't want to go in. I am weeping, and I'm like, oh, God, I'm not going in. And my mother's like, there is no farmer. My dad's like, I built the damn house.
There was no one else living here before us.
Right. He's like, there's nobody here. No farmer killed anybody. Allison, go to your room. Mike, get inside the house.
Well, I got to give it to Allison for the creativity on that one.
Yeah. No.
I mean, you started it.
Right.
What do you think you actually saw?
I probably just saw a shadow of something. Or you know how when...
A shadow person.
Car lights, it might have been my first shadow person. Could have been that night. But usually, when car lights come up the driveway.
Yeah.
Like shadows just go off of weird things. The shadow could have come off a lamp, and I could have seen the shadow of the lamp against the wall. And I've been like, oh my God, it's a person. And then all my mom had to say was, no, it's not a person. You just saw a weird shadow. And I've been like, okay, that's fine. But then my sister's got to double down on the murderous farmer that lives in our living room.
She started an original Big Bend urban legend right in your very own home.
But that was fun, though. When we're talking today,
it was fun.
It's fun. Now I laugh at it and stuff. And but we're talking today to Josh Zeman, who made this really great movie called Cropsy. And we're going to talk to Josh in a little bit. And that was about an urban legend in his own town where he grew up in Staten Island, New York. And so the fun part is that he went out and investigated the urban legend, and he found the kernel of truth behind it. And that really launched a new kind of career for him, where he was producing films and stuff. Now he became like a true crime documentary filmmaker. And we're going to get into that in a minute, because Josh is a really fun interview and an interesting person. But I tell you, we used to try to investigate the urban legends in our own town all the time. So once I found out that the farmer was a fake, it was a fraud, my sister made him up. Then I was like, well, what are the urban legends of our town?
Yeah. What?
So growing up near Milwaukee, a burb 10 miles southeast or whatever of the city, there's a place called Mukwonago, Wisconsin. Real swinging town, Mukwonago, Wisconsin. All right. And there we had a couple of different older buildings. One was the Heaven City restaurant. And the urban legend there was that it used to be a brothel. Visited by Al Capone, as Al Capone visited every brothel.
He did so much traveling during his day, especially around Illinois and Wisconsin. I mean, Al Capone visited basically every restaurant, hotel, and other venue in this whole Midwest. Anyway.
He was the Anthony Bourdain of the 1920s. Just going place to place and visiting, trying the food and the hookers and blah, blah, blah. Anyway. But the brothel. So there's a place that was a brothel. Then it became a religious commune, and then it became a restaurant. It was closed down for a while and became a restaurant after that. And the urban legend about it was that it was haunted by spirits like this child of one of the prostitutes who, she got an offer to go out of town for the weekend from this rich mobster, and she had left her son in one of the closets there because she hid him because she didn't know. She didn't want the John to know, the mobster to know that she had a child. So she hid the child and then went away for the weekend with him and just thought that somebody else would let him out.
What?
And nobody
Seriously?
ever let him out. Yeah, that's the legend. Yeah. I didn't say it was fact.
No, I know, but okay.
But that was the rumor. And whether or not, there was some kind of truth associated with that particular aspect of it, people did see the ghost of a boy, often sitting on this bottom of the staircase and laughing at people coming by. It was just like a little boy dressed in 1930s clothing, laughing at people coming by. And people also, women, said that sometimes they'd be in the bathroom and they wouldn't be able to open the door to get out of the stall. And they'd feel like somebody was holding the door on them. And then they finally broke out. And when they left, they would see the little boy sitting in the staircase.
Oh, that's terrifying. Plus, being stuck in a public bathroom stall is scary enough in and of itself.
Right. And so people having this experience of seeing this, this little boy and ghost stuff, eventually the legend came out of it that it was the son of a prostitute who was there. But the truth behind it was a commune, like a free love commune. Like back in the 50s and 60s, and that's why they gave it that name, Heaven City, of the restaurant, was because it was that commune was a religious free love commune back in the 50s and 60s. So there was a kernel of truth associated with it. And then there was the haunting of the Rainbow Springs Hotel. And this was a hotel that was built and never actually was open to the public. Whole hotel was built.
Huge place, too.
Yeah, and the only thing that was ever used was parts of the hotel were used for a haunted house by the Mukwonago JCs at Halloween time. So none of the rest of it was ever used. I mean, you could still see the cable, for the closed circuit television, the cable television, sticking out of the walls.
Wow.
And everything. And everything was built, even had brochures for the place and stuff. And people would sneak in and out of this Rainbow Springs Hotel because they would hear a rumor that it was haunted. And it's because the person who was going to build the hotel killed themselves inside the hotel. And that was true. That's you can write in the late 60s. The guy lost his financing for the last little bit to open the hotel, and then he killed himself in there.
Oh, my goodness.
So then it becomes this rumor of a haunted place, and people start having weird experiences there. And then it's a place you investigate. Mm-hmm. And, those are two pretty, I wouldn't say generic, but they're pretty general kind of things. Like you can have an abandoned hotel or an old restaurant / brothel in almost any town. But not every town has the haunchies.
Haunchyville.
No, the Haunchyville is one of the most ridiculous. And Linda Godfrey, our friend Linda Godfrey, she talks about the haunchies in her book, Monsters of Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
And gets in there, and they're in Muskego, Wisconsin, which is about 5 minutes away from where I grew up in Big Bend.
Yeah, so you have personal experience, don't you, Mike?
Absolutely. I have not met any haunchies.
But you explored Haunchyville.
But I have gone to Haunchyville. Absolutely, I did. And I'd never really heard of it growing up, but then one of my friends worked at Williams Supper Club in Muskego, and they talked about Haunchyville as they were washing dishes. And so the haunchies were a bunch of angry little people who lived in small houses off of Mystic Road. And it's the same thing as we talked about in Cincinnati, and that we talked to our friend Vic in Austin about, that he grew up with that midget mansion in San Antonio, Texas, is that the haunchies were either a colony of people with dwarfism or former circus performers. And as former circus performers, they're angry about, feeling that...
exploited, basically.
Yeah, being exploited, and that non-vertically challenged people made fun of them their entire lives, and so they hated them. And so they went off to live in their own colony. And one of these colonies was supposedly off Mystic Road, which perfectly named Mystic Road.
Yeah, that's great.
In Muskego. And it's on Cincinnati. It's called Tiny Town. So there's always some kind of cutesy name associated with it, too. Haunchyville, but we had our own rumor about it. And then what would happen is you go down Mystic Road and you would supposedly see buildings that looked small, like they were built for little people, not built for, 5 to 6.5 foot people, regular. And that, they lived in miniature buildings and they constructed elaborate underground tunnels beneath Haunchyville so they could get away just in case the police came looking for them. And I know, it's so ridiculous that this whole thing. And in Monsters of Wisconsin, Linda Godfrey talks about one man going down Mystic Road, and then what happens is people find him the next day burnt on the side of a barn down Mystic Road. And the thing is, there were all these little footprints surrounding the body. That's how the story goes. So, they found a burned body of somebody who went down Mystic Road, never to return. Set on fire, and then they're just little footprints.
And that's a perfect story because it leaves just enough to the imagination to make it extra creepy. Because, you figure, you just picture these little creatures like doing a victory dance after ending this man's life. There was a recent issue of Milwaukee Magazine, the May issue, that two of our fabulous Patreons actually brought to my attention. Wayne and Marsha, thank you for that.
Thank you, Wayne and Marsha, for being part of the community.
Yeah, they had a whole issue that featured an article on unsolved mysteries and hidden history of Milwaukee, and there was a bit about the Haunchies and Haunchyville in there, and I was surprised to learn that part of the legend includes the area being watched over by a full-sized gun-toting albino man. So that was something new that I hadn't heard before, although I've heard many, many things about Haunchyville, so... Just another.
I heard he might shoot at you, or he'll shoot a warding shot.
Oh, okay.
If you get too close to Haunchyville.
Yeah.
And then if you get any farther, the Haunchies attack you with baseball bats.
Oh my gosh.
Or what they'll do to you is they'll cut you off at the knees with axes to come down to size. They'll cut you down to size.
Why are they called the Haunchies?
Well, the only reason I ever heard of them called the Haunchies is because that guy whose body's burned at the side of the road, there was a note found next to his body that said the Haunchies made him
like they made him end his own life.
Yes.
Okay.
So the Haunchies made me do it. And I've been to Haunchyville. It's hard to...
You're a frequent tourist.
Back there. Yeah, back in the day, you couldn't see any little houses or anything, but we did freak ourselves out a little bit. And this isn't even when I was like 15. This is like when I was 21. We did freak ourselves out a little bit because I heard like a weird, pterodactyl noise. It was and I ran.
Well, Mike, two things. I know we're going on a bit too much about Haunchyville, but I do remember you telling me about it for the first time way back when in college, shortly after we met each other. And I distinctly remember you telling me that there were stop signs on the street that were a little lower down.
Yes.
Oh my
God,
signs.
I'm glad you remember that. I didn't even remember.
So that was one little clue that might lead to more rumors, right? And then the other thing I remembered was that you said it wasn't that far from the marsh where you had your experience seeing the shadow person. Right?
No, I mean less than 10 miles.
Okay.
Less than 10 miles away from
That's not super close, but I mean, same neighborhood, so there's weirdness going on.
Yeah, and the same radius. The same radius. They're both 5 to 10 minutes away from Big Bend. Mosquito
close to your home
direction. Yes, very, very right, close to the home where the farmer haunts.
Right. The farmer.
So Haunchyville was always a classic growing up. We had that. We had Rainbow Springs. We had Heaven City Motel. We had a old abandoned farmhouse that we used to call the Gates of Hell, and that's where people.
This sounds like a lovely place.
Happen. Well, it was like burnt down. It was like a burnt down farmhouse, and you could just see it from the road. And it's gone now because there's a hospital there and a Walmart and all that kind of stuff. But 20 years ago, there was nothing in that field besides this little house behind some trees. And, maybe I've told this story in the podcast before, but I'll make it quick. We all go down to the Gates of Hell one night. We break out the Ouija board and start playing it. And my friend Brett, he's roaming around the place looking around. And he goes, "Hey, why don't you use this as an antenna?" And throws a bone on top of the Ouija board. And I'm like, where the hell did you get that?
Yeah, and that totally sounds like a line straight out of a cheesy horror movie, too.
Let's use this as an antenna. He throws a bone. And in the walls were all these animal bones.
Oh, yeah.
Like inside the walls. And I'm not, what people did there or screwed around there, or they did it just to scare people kind of thing.
Also,
the gates of hell.
Animals do go in between the walls and nest and stuff like that. So it's not entirely
That's true.
out of question that it could just be a natural occurrence.
That's true. But there was like 100 bones inside the wall.
Yuck.
It was like somebody was trying to rebuild the catacombs in France.
Oh.
There was some weird stuff going on there. And it went to the gates of hell and played the Ouija board and had fun. Not too far away was the Beast of Bray Road.
That's a well-known one.
I talk about Linda a lot. And that was on the news when I was starting in high school. Like the Beast of Bray Road was on the news, so you want to go there and
cool.
see if you could actually see a werewolf on Bray Road. And so when I think about the urban legends that we had as a kid, some of them came true. I mean, Rainbow Springs came true. They didn't come true, but it was based on the truth of the owner killing himself inside there. And Heaven City was a commune, was a brothel, was a free love place, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's finding that truth inside the urban legend that makes it extra exciting. Like we can share a story that we all scare each other with, but then when you go there and find out, like, oh crap, there's a reason that this story was written in the first place. That's what makes it really exciting. And that's what we're going to talk with Josh Zeman about. Josh, for people who are unfamiliar with your work or just heard you for the first time, you're a writer and you're a documentarian. How do you define yourself as what you do?
That's a great question. I guess today that, you can be so many things. For me, storyteller.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the medium. It's the story, and some stories can be told in a whole bunch of different mediums, whether that's like screenwriting, narrative films, or telling it through documentary.
Okay. Well, the first time that I saw your work was actually a couple years ago, and I was looking around Hulu, and I saw Cropsy, and it looked like a cool thing, and I was taking care of my baby at the time, and she wasn't old enough to figure out what was going on, so I'm like, well, I can watch this movie then. And we ended up watching it in the middle of the night, and I was pretty terrified in parts. But, it was based on the urban legends that you heard as a kid growing up on Staten Island, right?
Yeah.
So to get a little bit of your background, we always like to ask, when you're getting involved in weird stuff, the dark side of life and everything, there's usually some kind of moment, some kind of origin point, something that, drew you in because it's, most people don't pick this kind of thing. So was there anything when you grew up, what drew you to this kind of stuff?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess I was always told that my hometown was so idyllic, and it was everybody was always trying to put on this aura of white picket fences and beautiful suburban streets. And I think Staten Island, New York, was definitely the ultimate bedroom community. Everybody from Brooklyn, Queens, everybody from the city had moved to Staten Island. I did too. And it's very interesting because all those people who moved from the big city, when you grow up in the big city, if there's like an abandoned lot on your block and you're in the city, only bad things happen in that abandoned lot. That's where you get beat up on your way to school. That's where people find the dead drunk or the dead body. That's where, somebody gets assaulted, a woman gets raped. All these, horrific things happen in these like abandoned areas in the city. When all those people moved to Staten Island, including myself, and found this huge green belt, this forested area, it suddenly became, oh, that's where all the bad things happen. But it's not a lot. It's a whole forest. And so, but then they had their white picket fences and their beautiful driveways. And so I guess I've always been attracted to showing people the other side, the underbelly. And it was definitely there in Staten Island in spades. When you left your house and your beautiful manicured lawn and you ventured out into the woods, suddenly you found abandoned mental institutions and tunnels and things like that. So if you like spooky stories, this was one that had come to life. And so it was very real. And so I realized how exciting and fun and interesting that could be. And I definitely liked scaring myself as a kid. So, it was the perfect storm of fun factors.
So when you were looking into becoming a storyteller or a filmmaker or things like that, were you somebody who was always into horror movies or true crime, or were you like, you know what, I went to film school to make the next Citizen Kane, and I ended up with Citizen Cropsey?
Another good question. I've always liked, when I was a kid, I used to read Stephen King like he was going out of style. So, it was always, I always liked the Stephen King. For me, that was it, and so I guess I've always been attracted to that. It was interesting that the documentary side I kind of fell into. I liked scary stories, but when I realized you could tell a scary, the challenge of telling a real scary story was much more interesting to me.
And that's the line it seems like you've followed since. And for people who aren't familiar with it, first of all, you can watch Cropsey on Netflix. And so you probably have a streaming service.
Amazon, iTunes, they can go, you can pretty much find it.
And just a quick primer on it. Now, you guys grew up with an urban legend of, a killer coming out of the woods and abducting and taking a kid and stuff. And what I think is really interesting about this is that we all had, I grew up near a woods, suburban Milwaukee kind of thing, like the same kind of picket fence area that you're talking about. My parents had left, the city, moved out to the suburbs and stuff, and we grew up in the 70s. And then we still had the stories of, oh yeah, well there's, something back there and everything. And everybody has that story. And this legend of Cropsey even inspires a couple of early 80s horror movies.
That's right.
And so you guys, you talk about this and, you can look up and see these early, cheesy horror movies that are based on it. But the thing is, when you went to investigate, you found the truth behind the story.
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing, right? What comes first? Well, first of all, I always think there's some basis in fact to almost any urban legend. There's some grain or kernel of truth. And so I think that's important. And it's saying like, okay, well, why did this urban legend come about? Urban legends are cautionary tales, yes, but there's obviously something more here as to why this urban legend came about. Sometimes it's some true crime, some crime that's been unsolved, or some accident that happened, basically like typically some kind of event that we can't reconcile. And so the only way we can reconcile, we can understand it, especially as a child, is to add a story to it. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Or if you have a cautionary tale and you want to make it really creepy, you kind of add in a mysterious murder that has no answer. And so it becomes the what if, it becomes the could this possibly be true? And so that's how it kind of all comes together. For me, we had these child murders, and the question was whether or not, was this really Cropsey? Is this where the Cropsey legend came from? Was this a story that was being told by the community to keep their kids out of these woods because they could never prosecute the guy who they knew was doing it? It's one thing for me to tell you, there's a pedophile in the woods, don't go there. To a kid, that doesn't really mean anything. Right. But if I tell you there's an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand in the woods, don't go in there, that would work.
And, it's funny because we talk about this on the show all the time, because we talk about these different legends from different nations all across the world of different monsters and everything they have. And a lot of them are particularly seem to be for some kind of how to keep kids behaving. All these urban legends, like all these monsters, like in Iceland particularly, there's a monster who'll eat you if you don't do your knitting. And it's like, why would that monster do that? Well, because in Iceland, if they don't do their knitting, they're going to have a very dangerous winter. And so I think it's funny that you're talking about these urban legends that you grew up with, and then all of a sudden you're investigating it. You find almost a history behind it. But when they come out, it seems that urban legends themselves, there's like no particular author of them. Like today we might be able to trace it to like the person that made a meme, or like you can find the guy that invented Slender Man in the original Photoshop. But when you go back to these urban legends, it seems like a game of telephone that goes across the culture.
Well, I think that's also the point. Meaning, like, if you can find the answer, then it's kind of boring. But if you're constantly finding yourself going down the rabbit hole like a conspiracy story, and it never ends, it makes it that much interesting. It keeps it going, and it keeps it going, and it keeps it going. Slender Man I like, but if it wasn't for the two girls, I don't necessarily know how sticky it would be per se. But like when I've always I hate it when they talk about the original guy who created Slender Man, because it's like, then it makes it kind of boring. It's like, oh, there's the answer. Now, if you go back and you're like, no, that guy just took an amalgamation of all these other, urban legends, like the German urban legend, and, then you can kind of keep going down the rabbit hole and realize, well, it's just another chapter to this big book, and the chapters never end.
And I think, as a storyteller, I'm sure you know that I guess that's what they did to us in Lost. Was half the mystery is what's exciting, and then when you get the answer, you're like, it's a cork. It's a cork. You guys are killing me.
Yeah. So never make sure it never ends.
So I really appreciated what you did with your investigation behind the urban legend. That's something that we do on the show. I write haunted history tours, and
where?
We do it in Minneapolis, Madison, Wisconsin, St. Paul, Minnesota, some different smaller towns in Wisconsin, like Lake Geneva near Chicago, and Waukesha, Wisconsin, these areas. And a lot of it is, you take these urban legends that people hear, and then let's go dive in and see if there's a reason that they exist. If there, if there's something to it, like, one of the places that I've written a history tour for is Waukesha, Wisconsin, where the Slender Man stabbing happened.
Right.
And so I think that the investigation stuff you did on Cropsey was great, and I enjoyed that. And so I immediately went to Killer Legends next. Like, that was like the next day. I was like in the middle of the night when I'm feeding the kid. I'm like, hey, you want to see John Wayne Gacy?
Right.
So I encourage everybody to check it out. And I don't want to ruin everything by just, talking about it, because you can watch it and see it. It's a succinct format. But so you guys picked, for Killer Legends specifically, like 4 big urban legends that we all grew up with. And can you tell us what those were?
Sure. And that was originally going to be a pilot for a TV show. And then the TV show didn't happen. And so we're like, okay, well, these are, but everybody wants to know where the urban legends came from. So we kind of released it as a standalone. We did the babysitter, who gets called from inside the house. Also, a stranger is calling.
Yeah.
Did you check the children? That's, one of my favorites. The hook for a hand, the couple making out in the car and there's a hook on the door. That's, one of the most famous. We did Poison Halloween Candy. Everybody seems to like that one, where Poison Halloween Candy came from. And at the time, the one that kind of was a little bit of an outlier was clowns. How did clowns become creepy? Because it's not necessarily an urban legend per se, but I thought it was an urban legend. To me, it was an urban legend, and I guess we ended up proving that. But that one, interestingly, had its own kind of life after we did that. So it's just very interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, since that's come out, it's even like the clown hysteria of, people in Tennessee, like schools closing down because somebody reports weird clowns near the school, or kids say they saw something and all of a sudden the school closes. Clowns are our modern day satanic ritual abuse.
Yes, it was very weird. We did the series, we did the show before any of the clown stuff happened. Then literally right after the show, there was a clown sighting in Staten Island, and we had thought that maybe some kids had seen Killer Legends, and there was the Staten Island connection because that's where I'm from, and they had done it as a viral scare for one of their horror movies. And then from there, I think it was a confluence of things. Like, it's not just because of Killer Legends. I guess it was in everybody's zeitgeist. But then it just went bonkers, and that was correlated to Trump and the politics of that time. It was just very strange and very weird, the whole chaos theory. Right.
Fall of 2016 was a very interesting, I'm sure there must be some kind of astrological explanation if you're into that, but that's stars aligned in a very unusual way at that time.
It was very bizarre. And I remember I was doing a podcast with a writer from Germany as the clown wave was spreading across Germany, and it was intermixing with some neo-Nazi stuff. It was really far-right politics, like burning of cars and shit. So it was really weird how it started to just spread from that.
I was going to say, if you want to really double down on the terror of clowns, you add in Nazi clowns, and that's going to scare the crap out of everybody.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and then it has this weird kind of like, again, chaos, the whole thing about chaos, or like, clowns revel in chaos. That's the whole Joker theme. I'm an agent of chaos. And then when you've got like marauding groups of people dressed in clown outfits, burning cars or marauding across the countryside, that basically like triple feeds in.
And, I think that's really interesting, the way you're talking about that, Josh, because Gary Lackman, who we just had on the podcast about a month ago, he wrote a book called Chaos Magic, and it's all about how like a cult theory in the far right, in the reactionary thing, and the using of this, and so the idea that clowns as agents of chaos also feeding into the whole like reactionary movement. That fits in perfectly. And so they did find a life of their own. I thought your research was the best, or I was the most like, damn, that was a good one, was on The Hook. The Hook
killer.
Really? Yeah, I was like, you found the story that we've all been waiting for since we were kids.
Well, look, but who knows? There are other things that we just couldn't include in there, which is the fact that was also kind of prevalent in the late 70s, the Caryl Chessman murders, a guy who would stop people who were making out in their cars. He actually pretended to be a cop with a red light. Or even David Berkowitz, son of Sam, approaching people as they were making out in cars, So was it the Texarkana, Texas murders? It could have been, for sure. It was very interesting. Not only did we have like the motif of the making out in cars, but we also had what that guy wore, the mask, and you can see that it's a precursor to some other masks. So it's just very interesting how these stories get pulled. The other interesting thing about that, and I mentioned it in the series, but I wish I could have mentioned it and gone even further, which is Charles B. Pierce, the director of the film The Town That Dreaded Sundown. So Charles B. Pierce directs The Town That Dreaded Sundown, right? That was like the first use of like a film that really kind of broke the is this real or is this not convention. Talking about a crime that had been unsolved, saying that the killer is still lurking around, but doing it as kind of this kind of like based upon true events, but then screwing around with the events. That's the same guy who did The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is like another totally terrifying film. And the guys who did Blair Witch said that Charles B. Pierce was a little bit of a kind of motif that they were doing when they did the Blair Witch. So just the fact that, as I tried to show, that the community comes out and watches this movie in the place where the killings happened, they're legend tripping, and we were there, myself and my partner Rachel, at the time we were doing this documentary about the people watching the movie. At the same time, there was a narrative film being made, the remake of The Town That Dreaded Sundown, with two documentary filmmakers watching the movie. So
how self-reflexive can you get?
It was weird. It was like, I was like, either we completely jumped the shark, totally on top of us, or like it's just totally, or we're right on the money. Like you don't quite know in the whole, meta world, but it's very fascinating. That whole story.
Well, I thought, so that research was great. And plus, like when you finally find the truth out about poison candy, you realize, you're like, oh no, my mom was right. Because you grow up and you're thinking, oh, this is all crap, whatever. None of this candy's poison. But then you find out the real story behind it. And it's just, that kind of delving into the truth behind, urban legends and all that stuff we've been talking about since we were kids. It was just really exciting. So I heartily recommend you guys checking out the Killer Legends, and because I think you're going to have a lot of fun if you do. And that one's available too, I think, everywhere, like Hulu, Netflix, the whole deal.
I think you could get it Amazon, Netflix, iTunes, Vudu, like a whole bunch of different places.
And it's just a fun way to explore some, and you're going to hear some stories you hadn't heard before. And plus, it does really bring into, if you watch that and listen to our episode on where we talk about clowns, I think you can become a clown expert this year. So, after you got into that stuff, and did that kind of, typecast you as the urban legends filmmaker? Or, did you find it now that people were coming up to you with pitches like, hey, you should hear about this legend? Or was there something that, had changed, like once you had these, like, really couple successful things?
Yeah, it was very interesting. Like, surprisingly enough, when I went and pitched it out, it's funny, I don't think sometimes the network executives don't understand about urban legends. They're like, wait a second, but what's the ending? And you're like, there is no end. That's the point. And then it becomes creepier. So it's just very interesting. They're like, wait, there's no ghosts? I'm like, no, there's no ghosts. There's urban legends and the stories and the truth. And, so it was very interesting when I went and pitched the shows around how I guess in the cultural zeitgeist, it had been about ghost hunting and not story hunting.
Right. And this is a time when, Ghost Adventures is super popular. Ghost Hunters is in season, 11 or whatever. And so you guys are going around and saying, okay, now we're doing these, now we're hunting legends. But the thing is, you don't just get an EVP at the end or, an orb or whatever. Like, you're like, well, what happens? Well, what happens is we kind of found some truth behind it and some BS behind it.
Yeah, it's. I think we have a tendency sometimes to want our stories to be wrapped up. We want to be satisfied, and that's what I like. I like stories that aren't satisfying because I like stories that force us to keep going or to realize that it never ends. And so I find that very interesting. But sometimes, especially if you're like kind of some types of executives, sometimes they don't quite understand. It's very hard to put your finger on what makes an urban legend or the delving into the urban legend so fascinating.
Well, was there any particular legends that you guys were looking to explore that you were excited about that you didn't get to do? And so like it's going to be on your docket for next time, or next time you're going to explore it or whatever? Or was there anything that you did investigate and you're like, this isn't even worth it?
There's some. I mean, that's a good question. I think at the time Slender Man was coming out, so that was something we were excited to be looking at. I'm excited to be looking at internet urban legends and how the internet has become the new digital campfire and how that affects us. It's interesting to see how what scares us has changed over the years. Now things that scare us are sometimes in our computer and not outside in the real world. They're in video games, things like that. There's a lot of urban legends, and I think there's some very interesting, there's something to be gained from everything. As for what the stories are, there's just so many out there it's even interesting how they change. Was the idea of, the stolen kidney real? Was that fake 20 years ago, and how is it real now?
And just so everybody knows, that's the one where, I always heard it as a guy like meets two girls in Las Vegas or whatever, and he thinks he's gonna have a wild night or whatever. They're like, oh, come back up to the room. He goes up to the room with them, gets knocked out, like he doesn't remember anything. He wakes up in a bathtub full of ice, blood all around, a sharp pain in his abdomen, and there's a note that says, call 911 immediately. If you want to live. And when he does, he finds out that one of his kidneys is gone. And so they duped him into stealing the kidney. Is that the right gist of it?
Yeah, that's it. And so, the question is like the American version of that versus like the real version, other things like Chupacabra, all these other very just interesting, people in the sewers, or the mole people who live in the tunnels. Like, it's all very interesting.
Or the lizard people who live underneath Los Angeles. And,
right, yes.
Did you, when you were talking to different people, and I'm sure you've talked to a million people about different urban legends, and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe you talked about this, or I thought it was my town and everything. Has there been anything in particular that they told you a story or a different twist on the legend that really surprised you? That you're like, oh, I can't even believe you guys had that, or there was something totally different or meant something totally different than the one we had?
I can't really think if there's anything like that. Just the most surprising thing to me is like the sheer power. Well, first of all, the fact that it changes. Like even Cropsey, like I'm always just surprised when I go back into the woods in Staten Island to see how that urban legend has changed from what it was. And I was like, I can't believe they took this legend and then they saw us. Like now it'll be like, yeah, these two documentary filmmakers are dead. And I'm like, no, I'm still here. So, but the kids have managed to like do that. And I was like, oh, really? What happened to them? You know, how did they die? You know?
Well, what's funny is that you mentioned the Blair Witch Project before. And you think that in this day and age, we've all got computers, we can all fact checks. I mean, Snopes was still around in 1999 when the Blair Witch Project comes out. And yet I still remember logging on to like my favorite movie site, and people there would be talking about this weird video that was found in Maryland. I'm like, yeah, people found this video and we're just like, they're going to make a movie out of it and they're going to release it. And I don't know if it's going to be in the theaters or on video. I'm not sure, but you guys got to check it out. It's totally freak out, you know, and everybody's reading it and they're commenting on message boards and stuff. And it almost seems like even now that we can talk to any person on the planet whenever we want to, like right now I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. And where am I talking to you? Where are you at today?
I'm in Humboldt County, California.
Okay, so we're talking 2,000 miles apart, like instantaneously, even now that we have the power to speak across the continent or across the world. Still, nobody's going to do the research. You know, they still read it on an internet forum, and they're like, oh, yeah, like, let me tell you what I heard. And so it seems like this is part of more of the human condition. Almost, and it doesn't matter if we have awesome technology or can check urbanlegends.com. I mean, I'm sure we have an 85-year-old uncle who everybody has who said something that, you know, this is what this famous person said, and it's obviously crap and not true. And they're like, well, they can just check this on the internet, right? And they don't bother to. So in your research, have you found that we're getting better at detecting BS, or nothing has changed even now that we have the entire of human sum of knowledge in our pockets?
It's worse. It's worse because the BS spreads, because now we've democratized the stories. So I think there's one thing that's very interesting, which is the curative process of urban legends, right? If I tell you a story and it's not very good, you're not going to repeat it,
right?
You know, and if it doesn't have the right combination of could it be true, kind of scary, weirdness, like, you know, it all has to. The right urban legend checks the boxes, you know, and, you know, it's scary, feels like it could be real. It's got a couple mysterious elements. And so those urban legends, if they're getting spread around the campfire, it's typically because they're good. They've lasted, you know. Now, unfortunately, because of, like, say, the digital campfire, everybody could just throw up their urban legend. And it's unfortunate because we get not a lot of well thought out urban legends versus the ones that are like really, you know, curated, you know, and the ones that last, and therefore the ones that create history. So it's a lot of noise, you know. If you look at all like the creepypasta, everybody's just trying to come up with them versus like, well, give me a couple that like the really good ones and why they're really good and why they've lasted.
And I think that's a good point. That and you're the guy who's probably researched them more than anybody when you're looking for things to make the movie about and, you know, write a script and something to explore. And so, you know, after you went into Killer Legends, then you guys went on your next thing, was the search for the Long Island serial killer.
Yeah.
And I was not in the Midwest instead of the East Coast. I've never even heard of that before your show. And so where did you hear about that for the first time?
Well, you know, there's a lot of connections between, I think I had heard about it. You know, I was always into, you know, serial killer stories, you know, especially because a lot of the urban legends, you know, the crossover there and Cropsey. And I never wanted to do a real serial killer story. Like Cropsey for me wasn't necessarily more of a serial killer story than it was an urban legend story. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
But, you know, because of the true crime element, people were always like, oh, you love serial killers. And I'm like, no, I don't really love serial killers.
And it's hard to say that, too. You're like, oh, you love serial killers. Like, you're not going to be like, thumbs up to it.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I don't really love serial killers. Like, I'm intrigued by it, you know, but I like things that are how stories get told. And I remember it happening. I was like, oh, this is going to be solved. Like, there's no way that, like, a guy could kill 10 sex workers and not get caught in this day and age. And I think that's what a lot of people thought. And then he didn't get caught. And so I was like, you know what? Like, I didn't want to do a serial killer story, but there was another added element, which is the fact that the police weren't saying anything. And that forced the community to talk about it on their own, on social networking and chat forums. And I saw the crossover with Cropsy there, where people were creating their own legends, if you will, their own theories about what had happened. And that was a way for me to explore the idea of creating monsters and creating stories, out of unsolved tragedy or out of mystery.
Why do you think the police weren't saying anything? Well,
what we find out later is because the police had kind of bungled the case a little bit. They didn't have the right people on it. And there was even, if you watch the show, there was even some very specific reasons why the police didn't say anything about it. Some very shocking reasons. So I now know why the police weren't saying anything, and it's pretty amazing to me. Like, you have a serial killer out killing people in like a beach community, and the police first commented on it, they kind of bungled it, and then refused to talk about it. Well, you can't really not talk about an active serial killer case in a community. It was like Jaws. It was like not talking about the shark, like, we're not going to tell anybody about the shark, but Brody's like, but it's the tourist season, we have to tell people. And so there was a lot of that going on, but it ended up being super fascinating and a real crazy story.
And I thought it was a fascinating premise, and to get into something that a lot of people hadn't heard before. Because even though there's like an acronym for the LISK, the Long Island Serial Killer, it didn't have the kind of. And first of all, what do you think it is with serial killers and acronyms?
That's very good. We like to name things. You know what I'm saying? We need to put a name. We always like to put like a catchy name. It's what the press does. The Grim Sleeper, BTK. As in the press, they always like to name a serial killer because then it's catchy, and then people talk about it all the time. So, for lack of a different type of Grim Sleeper type, BTK, LISK, that's just how we name our monsters.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because then it's almost like we have these nicknames for people, and then they become, that adds to the legendary status too, because it's not just some regular dude. It's not just Bob Jones. Like, it was like, right. Oh, watch out, Bob Jones is coming. It's like, right. Watch out, don't close your eyes because the son of Sam's there.
Totally. We love to name our monsters, and that's a kind of reverse back on the Rumpelstiltskin idea, which is, there's a guy talks, Bill Ellis, who you see in some of our pieces. He's a folklorist, and he says, to name something is to own it. And so if we could call it Lisk, or if we call it the Grim Sleeper, we could put a name on it, and that both adds to the terror, but also helps us address the terror.
So you worked on that, and then what's the... When I was looking up your information and stuff, I found the project you're working on right now is something I'd never heard about before. And that's the 52 hertz whale?
Yes, another mythical animal that's out there in the oceans that I was just very interested in. A little bit of a departure on the horror urban legend side, but still another very interesting idea that I wanted to take a look at. That movie's almost done. So that's kind of a search for a lost animal, a little bit more on the cryptozoology side, I guess.
Yeah, well, can you get into that a little bit? Because I'd never even heard of that before.
Sure. There's this whale that the U.S. government first heard on these top secret microphones that we have in our oceans, which we use to listen for things like submarines or underwater volcanoes or earthquakes. Very sensitive microphones that are all scattered throughout the ocean. And they first heard the sound. They thought it was a submarine. They didn't know. And instead they discovered it was a whale that calls out at a frequency that no other whale can technically understand. And this whale has been calling out over 20 years through the oceans, calling out and never once receiving a response. And the whale has, in essence, become a symbol for a lot of people that talk about loneliness or, our kind of loneliness in the digital world and things like that.
Like, so even though this whale is in this ocean teeming with life, he's still all alone.
That's theoretically the idea, and so kind of do this kind of journey to find the 52 hertz whale.
Now, where did you hear about that for the first time? Was it just like, did somebody put an article on Vice or something, or where would you hear about that for the first time?
It was an article in the New York Times.
Oh, okay. And were they dealing it from a scientific perspective, or were they dealing it from like the kind of urban legend perspective?
Well, the New York Times.
Yeah,
it was in the science section of the New York Times, and I think it was a science writer had basically found this scientific article that talked about this whale. But what was so interesting was the fact that the scientists were talking about the whale in emotional terms. And so it's the kind of intersection between science and emotionality.
And so when you were working on the movie and you were doing your search, did you have to like go out in the boat? Did you drop sonar down, or did you look for it like you were looking for Nessie, or
A little bit, yes. I don't want to ruin the movie, but yes, we went on a search for the 52 hertz whale.
Well, that sounds like fun. So when is that one coming out?
Hopefully next year. We'll have to see, but hopefully soon. And
that sounds like fun. And so, what's your next urban legend, or is your next project going to be something different? Like now you're going to do like a feel-good comedy?
Well, the whale's a little bit of a feel-good story.
Right, there's no hooks. There's no hooks in it.
Yeah, you could say. Now I'm probably going to flip back to the dark side a little bit.
Okay. I was wondering, because a lot of times you got to come up with these ideas for stories, and you're looking for funding, and you're out there pitching and like saying, okay, we're going to make it like this, make it like that. Has there ever been like a kind of legend or one of your projects that you pitched to somebody that they either like the reaction was like, that's too morbid, or that's too goofy or something like that? Like, I know that a lot of times they'll come back and be like, yeah, but what's the ending? And you're like, well, the ending is... it's all a mystery, like you're pitching a David Lynch movie. But have you ever come back when they're just like, nah, we can't, that's way too dark, man?
Yeah, of course, all the time. That's pretty much most of the answer is that's way too dark. It's just a question of like how dark they're willing to go. A lot of times not very dark in reality, unfortunately.
And do you find out in this world of streaming and stuff like that there's probably there's more opportunities for the work like you're doing, like that? Because I know like with Chiller, because Killer Legends was really for Chiller, right? Was that the point?
Yep.
That a horror streaming network. Are you finding that there's more chances for you to do cool stuff like this?
There definitely is. I also try and raise the bar. So there are opportunities to do cool stuff like this. At the same time, are there opportunities to do really high-end things like this? And it's coming. It's more and more. They are coming. We're hitting a little saturation in the true crime world, but the opportunities are there, thankfully.
And just for maybe people who are into this kind of thing, and once they check out your work. If they haven't had a chance to check out Cropsy or Kill Legends or anything like that, is there anything specific that you'd recommend? You're like, okay, so make sure you check out and if you want to go further down the rabbit hole, is there anything that you love watching that you suggest that they check out next?
I mean, for me, it's just like, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I just watch documentaries about, I just love all that stuff. For me, if you really want to cry, there's a movie called Dear Zachary that's just freaking heartbreaking. I love that one. I like a lot of different stuff. Sometimes I don't watch a lot of crime. But if you've never seen The Staircase, totally watch The Staircase. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's about it, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, I got to thank you very much, Josh, for your time. We absolutely appreciate it. And if people, besides by checking out your work on Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, and all those places, if they want to learn more about you or follow when your latest project is coming out, or if you have a newsletter or a blog, where can they find out about you so they can see your next thing?
Sure, they can go to Facebook. There's a Killing Season page, and that's the Killing Season. There's a Cropsy page, and I'm on Twitter, Josh Zeman. So... and that's JOSHZEMAN. So please come and check us out.
All right, you can find that in the show notes. Thank you very much for your time today, Josh. I really enjoyed talking to you.
All right, thank you so much.
Well, I'm definitely going to be keeping my ears open wide to hear any new urban legends around Madison, where we live, because I'm real curious to see what the stories are around here and maybe what the actual origins of those stories are.
Well, and that's right. And that's why Josh's Killer Legends series is really fascinating. And like you said in the interview, it was a pilot for something that was going to go a little farther, but still in the main movie that was released, you still get 4 super fascinating urban legends. And also Killing Season is pretty cool too. So just make sure you check out that stuff. We're all going to have links to Josh's work in the show notes.
Yes.
Where you can check out more of it, or just go on Netflix and just grab. You can just look up.
Or Amazon.
Check that out right now.
Mm-hmm. And if you know of any exciting urban legends from your area, we'd love to hear about them. So please send us a message. You can do that on Twitter at OthersideTalk, or you can send us an email, show@othersidepodcast.com, and let us know what your urban legends are, because we're always looking for fun, weird stuff like that.
Right. And the thing is, if you got a good urban legend, we're going to retweet it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it on the podcast in our next discussion about these kind of things. Because a lot of the stories we talk about on the show are stories that started off with a little bit of truth, and then people played a game of telephone until it became some outsized crazy thing. And then that's what we're eventually dealing with and investigating and talking about. And so getting at that original, what really happened, I think that's the essence of a lot of what we do on the See on the Other Side podcast. And also, we take some of that truth we find and we filter it through the lens of music.
Yes, indeed.
I guess the lens of music is a weird thing to put, because now we're getting a visual into an auditory. So maybe
we filter it through the headphones.
Yeah, the headphones of music is good. The auditory canal is good music.
It just doesn't have the same ring, though.
We filter it through the cilia of music. Anyway. So this week, Josh inspired we think this would be a good soundtrack right before you watch one of his movies to get yourself in a spooky mood. Here's a little track we cooked up called Killer Legends.
Every story's the same, no matter where you go to. It's just the names that have changed, but they can't hide the truth. When you're out playing games, deadly eyes are watching you. Yeah! It's the hook for a hand that'll skin you alive. It's the white battle van beckoning you inside. Brutal is this land where the innocent die. Yeah. And every town has a secret, and every bridge has a troll, and everyone among us has a little stain on their soul. thank you for listening to today's episode. You can find us online at othersidepodcast.com. Until next time, see you on the other side.
Last weekend, we had a show at the Hop Garden, and it was really special because we got to see one of our Patreons there, Mike.
That's right. Dr. Ned came down, braved the rain to hang out
Thanks
with
for
us
stopping
in there.
out, Ned. And he's just one of many of our wonderful community, the See You on the Other Side Patreon community. And you can be a part of it, too. Did you know that?
Of course I knew that. I'm going to tell everybody all about it. You guys should right now go to othersidepodcast.com/donate. So last Wednesday, we all got together, had a really fun Patreon hangout. Me, Wendy, we were also joined by our friend Scott Marcus, the guy that helped us put this interview together today from whatsyourghoststory.com. And so we all had to talk about different things.
Oh my gosh.
Scott was telling us about the different, the ghost tours and stuff that he was seeing in Florida. We talked about the latest paranormal stuff and movies that we had watched and stories that we'd heard over the week.
Yeah.
And then some of the stories we talked about ended up making it to the See You on the Other Side newsletter on Friday morning.
Ooh. And we also talked about the Ringwood Manor in New Jersey, which we're planning on paying a visit to. And also,
That's right.
We're going to all be watching Veronica, so we can talk about it next month.
That's right. So the thing is, watch the movie. We'll all get together and you can have a conversation, an intelligent conversation with people of your ilk. If you are listening to the end of this podcast, that means you are a fine, upstanding, very intelligent, paranormal, interesting person. And also you like great music, and we appreciate that. But the thing is, how many times have you seen a movie you really love or heard a really interesting ghost story or paranormal story, and you want to share it with other people, and you realize your friends are stupid? Upgrade your friends.
Or they're just too normal.
They might be two norms. They're two norms. And you can upgrade your friends by joining the See You on the Other Side podcast Patreon community. That's just what we're telling you to do. And you can do that for like $1 a month or even something crazy like that. And check that out, othersidepodcast.com/donate. Oh, that's the farmer.